So Zach Allen and I are here today on May 24th, 2016 with Staff Sergeant Gorham in the Carrollwoods Retirement Community in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Staff Sergeant Gorham was born on August 27th, 1925, began his service in February 1944 and ended his service in July of 1946. I'm Garrett Levy.
I'm from a family of five. An older brother, older sister, older brother, me, and a younger sister. And as such, I was kind of a look after myself boy. And I was not antisocial, I was just non-social. I never made good friends in school. I never played athletics. I refused to play basketball, baseball, or football. So they let me play squash, and I wailed the daylights out of the squash ball. You know how hard those are. That was expensive because I had to have my brackets really strong about every week and a half. So, but that was fun. I was at Exeter at that time. I was a sophomore or junior, middle schooler at the time of Pearl Harbor. And at Exeter, we did what we could for the war effort. We worked on farms during the summer and during the fall apple picking season. When it snowed, we went and shoveled out the railroads in Lawrence and Lowell, Massachusetts. They just needed a lot of labor. I was a middle grade student, I guess. One of the things you could do if you had Latin 1 and you took the course that was related to the war effort, you didn't have to take Latin 2. That was marvelous. Only I started with radio. I thought that would be a good thing. Well, something about radio just didn't make any sense to me. Putting wires like this and then getting pictures and everything. So I took geology. What that had to do with the war effort, I cannot tell you, but it was fun to do. And I did it, and my Latin teacher taught me. The rule in the draft then was that you could complete the first half of your last year before you were 18, and you'd be allowed to complete that last year. So I was 18 and a half in February when I got to the end of what would normally have been the June. So I went that summer with a whole lot of other students from other schools, St. Paul's and Exeter mostly, and had a good time. The draft was looming around, and they took us out of Exeter and took us over to Manchester, New Hampshire, and gave us shots and everything else. 3 months before they drafted us. I was drafted on the 5th of February, and on the 10th or 11th of February, I was in Fort Devens, Massachusetts. That fast. They just come with us, son boy. And so they shoved us into Fort Devens. I didn't pick the Army picked me. I guess there were ways you could get into college courses in the Navy or the Air Force and things, but nobody ever suggested those to me, and I didn't think to ask. I just followed the rules. So anyway, I wound up in Fort Devens, Massachusetts. Wasn't anything, you just got there. You didn't feel anything particularly. It's a dumb place to be, and it was cold in the middle of February. And we took tests on whether we were had good English or didn't have good English, reasonably sufficient in spatial relations and stuff, and they found that I was. And so they decided they had an order to fill a new ordnance company, automotive maintenance, all the way from trucks down to Jeeps. And they decided that I had good vibes for that, so they put me in there. Well, that's from Exeter graduates, prep school graduates. There aren't many of those in that kind of a draft of a choice selection. So I didn't find many people that were anything like me in this group. And it was that way all through my military career, military, if you can call it that. But you just did what they told you to do. And I went from there in 2 days. The next 5 days were on a troop train to Georgia, to Fort Benning, where I stopped the war too. But I started at Fort Benning in this company that was all chosen, all ready to go. I mean, it wasn't a training place. Then you get assigned to something. It was the whole thing altogether. One of the peculiarities of it was at the same time they had an order for us from New England, they also sent out an order to some people from the Ozarks, the Army school to learn to read and write. And what a wild bunch of bandits they were. Well, they weren't exactly social companions either, so, but none of it was a really very social companion. And I couldn't drive an automobile at age 18. That may surprise you. It surprised me. That just never bothered. My first license was to drive a T1 tank.
Wow.
So that's where I started. And the company was about 150 men with its officers, bless them. And there we were in Fort Benning, and we did our primary training, right, that group. There wasn't a special training group to do your basic training. My particular memory of that was there were a bunch of people that didn't know what they were doing. They're telling us what to do. Plus the fact that when I fired my rifle, which was a 1917 Enfield, I got deaf for 3 days. I fired it, and I'm still ringing in this ear today. But that used to drive my sergeant nuts, because I couldn't talk to him. He didn't care, he didn't know where it came from, he was just mad at me. So anyway, we went on. I was assigned to a training group that went out to Omaha, Nebraska to learn to be auto mechanics. And that it was right near Omaha, an old Civil War camp. But we were there for D-Day. D-Day came along when we were there. That was a nice town to be in. There was a lot of Polish people, had lots of big dances and stuff. That was nice. So they were nice to GIs. But then we came back, having theoretically been trained to be an auto mechanic. Remember now, I couldn't even drive when they went in. So this was a peculiar decision, but it worked out all right. And so we packed up all our stuff in big crates, poured in Cosmoline to keep everything from rusting, and sent it off to England, and went up to New Jersey and was sent across overseas in November, in the middle of a hurricane with a convoy of ships that were rolling like this. South American bathtub tourist boats full of nurses, the poor girls, they were all along the line, along the rail, all the way over in this hurricane, and they dropped our convoys because they couldn't launch the planes, couldn't pick up anything, so we got to England after 5 days on His Majesty's transport, the Carnarvon Castle. Well, that was good. We went up to the Midlands for about a month, and then we went down to the shore again, Devon, and went across to France, up the Seine, up to Rouen, and up to Brussels. And when we got to Brussels, we were the first American troops to be stationed in Brussels at that time. But we could hear from Brussels to the with the big you know, the big bulge, the bulge. Yeah, we could hear the artillery from the bulge where we were in Brussels. One of our people here lost a hand at the bulge. So, and he was the same age I was. He was 18 and he lost his hand the first day he went out. He's still here now. He's an atomic physicist. So that doesn't necessarily tie you up. But so I fixed Jeeps. And we split the company into a heavy maintenance and a light maintenance, and we did Jeeps in our little office. We had a nice little garage, like one you'd find around the neighborhood here. There were 25 of us in that. We did about 30 Jeeps that were coming back from the front all beat up. And we fixed those, and I got to be a pretty decent mechanic. And then VE Day came along, or close to it. And the obvious thing was, what do we do now? They took all us young brats from the service companies along the front and sent us to infantry training in the French Alps. And you know what for? It was to invade Japan.
Yep.
And we knew what for. And that was a different ball game. But, and from there, when he came through, and the captain said, "Gorham, don't you want to be a staff sergeant?" I said, "Sure." So I was a staff sergeant. And then I went home, and I came back as a staff sergeant to the same place, but a different company. And I showed up at the office, and the duty officer at 7 o'clock in the morning looked at my papers and said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I don't know." In the war for almost 3 years before I went in the Pacific, in tough parts of the Pacific. And my sister and sister-in-law were both residents with our family during that time. That was pretty tough on the two girls who weren't. And everything you touched involved the war all the time. So it was almost as though you were fighting it. Actually, I fought harder for the war before I was drafted than after.
Did you stay in close contact with your brothers while they were deployed?
No, they were too far away. Well, we did, yes, we did. They wrote home to their wives, and we were all in the same household. And,
kind of shifting back to after you got back from the war, you obviously had been through a lot, you were in the war. Kind of how did normal civilians look at veterans at that point, and how high in regards did they hold you?
Well, there's so many veterans around, why they didn't differentiate. When they draft dodgers, for instance, everybody to gang up on. Everybody said thank goodness and got on with their lives pretty much. The whole war syndrome kind of went away pretty quite quickly, except for this people without points like me that stretched it out for another year or so, but it went away quickly. When I got to Harvard, nobody ever talked about the war, except when are all these people going to get out of the way so we can have a decent place to eat.
So not talking about the war at that point was the societal norm, would you have spoken about the war more in that time period once you got back, more had it been the societal norm? Would you have spoken more to friends about it and just peers?
No, everybody just forgot about it. You know, they didn't make an issue out of it. At the end, it's been 5 years of a very tense time for the country, and people were just glad to be out of it. The president had died, Roosevelt, and Truman was in. Politics was more important than the war. The big relief efforts to revive Europe was high on the government's list then, and the Marshall Plan and some of those things that came along were important. And I think they had a lot to do with the country's acceptance of its responsibility, if you will, for having beat up Germany so completely. But the Germans asked for it, so that's the way we looked at it. But there was something that we had to do, even so. It was just destroyed the place so completely.
You talked after the war and relief efforts.
After the war, I think we did well. The Marshall Plan was very successful. It was just an overwhelming mess over there that we left behind. It wasn't all our fault, but the whole concentration camp problem and all that was tough for the country to absorb. But I think we did as well as we could have.
Kind of taking your experience from the military and knowing what we do about today's military and the advancements in there, how do you see where there might have been room for improvement in strategizing, how, just lost my train of thought, kind of the comparison between how military officials acted back then and kind of the contrast from today's time period to World War
I think the economy of the military is idiotic. Near where we lived in Augusta, Maine, is Bath Iron Works. It makes destroyers. And they make destroyers no matter what they cost. Some of the things you see on 60 Minutes, the way the military is spending its money, and what I've seen of the officers' corps running around playing golf and having a good time, one really wonders whether we're getting a professional army or whether we're getting a private club. That's my view. And I think a lot of people feel that way. We have an enormous budget in this country compared to other countries for our military. And politically, bombing the hell out of the Middle East isn't getting us anywhere. And then we say we shouldn't do it, and then we do it. I don't know, there just seems to be a disconnect between common sense and our military effort and the amount of money we spend on it, building planes that won't fly and boats that won't float. It happens all the time. Not the only department, but it's the biggest. That's my personal view. But it's not colored by any experience I had with the military. It's just common sense. But my experience with the military wouldn't suggest that I thought this was a wonderful group.
Kind of speaking to more a general society, can you describe the shift politically, economically, and just socially between like the post-war era and today, kind of what's changed over that time period? And
Well, the post-war era, we still had a real responsibility, socially, just to keep people alive, house children from dying all over the place. Concentration camps. We had a real concentrated area to operate in, that we had the responsibility to operate in, and I don't see that today. I think the United States is kind of wishy-washy about what it plans to do. Its Congress is dysfunctional, and I don't know what this country sees as its future. Southwest Asia is a mess. It used to be ours. It isn't ours now. And where do they plan to go?
so going back to that, when you got back to war and the sergeant staff and kind of your management of the officers club, what was that experience all about? Kind of the roles you had in managing the officers club.
Well, it was an accidental assignment that they needed somebody, and there I was with nothing to do, having flunked out totally in the officer's mess. And it was a good duty. I had a private room because I was up late, and the CO of my company discovered I was having a good time, so we decided I couldn't do that anymore. That's the only reason he possibly had. So I was put on an inventory, counting nuts and bolts deal for about 6 weeks. Totally futile job. Nothing to do with the war. And there I was. So after that, I was reassigned to Fort Benning, Georgia again, where we just fiddled around until July, when we were discharged.
Kind of going back to when you were just discharged, the certain emotions that came with it, I'm sure you were glad to get back to see your family and everything. What was your personal take on how you felt after you were discharged from the military?
Just thank goodness this is over. I had been in contact with the family regularly, though that wasn't anything new. After VJ Day, you got these 30-day leaves to go home. So you spent a lot of time at home anyway. And it was just a relief to go home. That particular summer, I hadn't started college yet. And so maybe that's coming up in what you did later.
Well, actually, it is right up next. Did you go back after for college, or did you?
No, I hadn't been in college at all, so I started Harvard University, that fall. That summer, my father died, and I think the questionnaire asked, was the GI Bill involved? Yes, it was, and it was a good thing for my mother when my father had died. We were then in Augusta, Maine, and I started college, did all 4 years afterwards. College was crazy because it was so packed with people who had been waiting to get back at it again. I felt sorry for the little preps fresh out of school. People who had been out of school for 3 years, looking down at these little preps all over the place. The place was crowded. All the rooms were double occupancy, what they usually were. But everybody was in a hurry to do the makeup. And so I did.
Did you ever run into people from your unit or people that you had connected with from the military through college? Nope.
No.
Let's see. How was the food while you were?
Okay.
And
At KP, I did enough KP that I thought maybe I'd like to cook, but I never got the opportunity. I cook now, but I didn't then.
kind of how were your supplies given to you when you were off during service? Were there care packages sent to you from family members, or?
Mother used to send us a fruit cake at Christmas. Sometimes they got there at Easter. But they were good.
Let's see. Obviously there was a lot of stress that came with being in the military during that time period, and kind of, can you speak to how you handled yourself, how you're able to, your coping mechanisms, and how you were able to get through the tough times that came with the war?
Well, our deal was pretty stable. It was just a garage where we fixed vehicles day after day after day. And there wasn't much stress involved with it, except accommodating the neighbors. I could speak French enough to get along with the neighbors. We had some French Canadian boys with us who came from New England with me, and they couldn't speak French at all. It was hopeless. So, but I could. I learned how to cut hair so I could get free butts from everybody to sell. So, a little enterprise with the deal. But there was no real anxiety with us. We had one buzz bomb that landed a couple blocks away from us. That's the closest we got to a war as such. Brussels was a big leave center. Downtown Brussels, they didn't want to go to because it was a madhouse. But in our part of town, it was a nice suburban apartment house that we had to live in. Slept on the floor, but what the heck, that was all right.
Where did you spend most of your time during your service in the military?
The one you remember the most is England and Brussels.
Looking back on it, do you wish you had looked into the other branches? Looking back on it, do you wish you had looked into the other branches before going into the Army?
No, I wouldn't bother, I don't think. I couldn't see that any of my classmates that did that got anywhere particularly. They just stayed in the Army longer. They went to school. They didn't go overseas. They didn't do much except go to school, but longer. The VE programs, Navy programs, they all had programs for, I don't know what they were looking for, long-term careers is one, but none of them stayed.
Do you still go to those reunions for the veterans programs, or?
Never.
Let's see. The most unusual event that you probably encountered while you were overseas?
Most unusual. day leave in Belgium, I guess. It was just a vacation day. That was just about as exciting as we got. We swam in a canal. Had a guy that drowned while we were there. Not in our company, but another one. That was not much excitement.
Did you receive any honors, medals, awards for your service?
No, just the two stars, Rhineland and Alsace-Lorraine locations where if you were standing up in those places, where you got a star. That's all. Well, I didn't get anything for heroism or anything. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
When you came back from your service after you had finished your deployment, what was kind of the national mood per se as to how we felt after the war and how society started to increase and start growing again?
Well, everybody was glad to be home. Everybody was glad to be welcomed home. And those that didn't have enough points, you got points for as long as you were in. Those that didn't have enough points, everybody felt sorry for, including the ones without the points. And all the make work and the stupidity that you had to just keep yourself occupied a little bit to keep from going nuts. But it was a total intellectual vacuum. That's as far as I was concerned.
And once you got back, you continued, or you started your college education at Harvard. What was your career from there on after you graduated?
It was industrial finance and insurance. Successful.
And did you ever deal with any people that were in your unit? No business relationships with them?
No. No. Not even in the garage. No.
Did you still work on cars after? Or you just kind of take that knack that you had for that after you just went straight to?
No. My father thought I ought to, but I didn't want to. I'd had enough garages.
How did your service in the military shape who you became as a person after you finished your education and kind of your perspective and outtake on life itself?
Not a bit. Not a bit. Except that if anybody asked me did I want to do anything for the military, there's a negative response, but I never was involved in the American Legion or any of those things. Never wanted to be. Nobody in my group ever talked about the war.
Was it kind of, it happened and you didn't really talk about it after? There was kind of a period where you just acknowledged it?
Just a period that happened and involved a couple of 2.5 years of your life. Actually, I was glad when I got to college that I had that time between prep school and college to kind of grow up a little. And that was useful.
Was there any point in your career that people would ever ask you about your service or what went on while you were in the military, or just left off the table?
I had a brother who was captain in the Air Corps in New Guinea and a brother-in-law that was down in Guadalcanal. So the family was involved in the war in a real way. But I was late in the whole thing. My next older brother had flat feet and they wouldn't let him in. So he became a gear grinder for Pratt & Whitney in the war industry. The idiocy of the whole thing of him was that after the war was all over, they decided they would draft him. So we went down to Texas and went through all the rigmarole of the Army for 1.5 years. When the war was on, they didn't want him.
Kind of speaking to the emotions when you were initially drafted, did you have any worries going in, kind of where you were mentally upon being told that you were going to go into war?
No, no. Because we, all the way from Pearl Harbor up, all of our civilian life was involved in the war effort all the time, all the way through. There was just a gradual build-up, and two brothers in the war already. We were sort of used to it all.
What were your emotions going into boot camp? Did you feel the first few days, were they rough? Were you feeling homesick and kind of questioning what this was all about?
Well, I'd always been kind of a loner, so, and it wasn't a boot camp, it was just an induction center. They're trying to find me. And you just did what you were told. You just wandered around. People told you what to do and which line to get in and how to invade your privacy. And
Was that kind of your MO throughout your entire time in the service, was just do as you're told?
yeah, pretty much.
Did you ever look back and kind of think where they could have done differently, where you kind of questioned why were we doing what we were doing during the war?
Well, one of the things I remember was after VE Day, and we were having a little evening in town. They gave us a little pass to go in town. Walking down the street, a couple of second lieutenants came by, and I said, "Good evening, sir," and they didn't salute. And they threw me in with the, sent me back to camp because I didn't salute the two bratty little GIs. So that was my view of the military at that point. That was at the VE Day. There was nothing to fight about.
Did you ever grow to appreciate and have a kind of further understanding after the war of why certain actions were taken during the war, where you had previously thought during the war you were kind of confused as to why we were doing this? Looking back after that, did you kind of?
No, we were fixing Jeeps, and that was necessary, and that was obvious. They were beat up Jeeps. A couple of times they were welding on the Jeeps, and they ran into some live ammunition in the back street. Made kind of happy day, but.
And then kind of going off of the live ammunition, did you ever see combat, or did you just strictly work on vehicles? Could you see?
No, never came close.
Could you see the effects that combat had on some of the other troops?
No, not really. No. It's like going to Scully Square in Boston, if you know what that was like. Troops coming back from the front obviously were living it up big in downtown Brussels. And we just avoided that part of town. We didn't join in sympathy or conversation about, gee, wasn't it awful, and stuff like that.
Did your brother talk much about Guadalcanal afterwards?
No, not much. My brother, no, neither one of them talked much about their service. My older brother was a captain, and I was a lowly GI, and we had some friendly arguments about how awful the office corps was.
Do you wish your brothers had told you about their experiences in the military?
Not especially.
Just on behalf of me and Zach, I wanted to thank you a whole lot for participating in the interview, and thank you for your service. That really meant a lot, and kind of just as we're starting to lose these stories of World War II veterans, it's nice that we can have a place to keep them.